Welcome to Q&A for session 6, Design, Build, Use, Building a Computational Research Platform for Web Archives. I'm Nicholas Taylor, Deputy Group Leader for the Research Library at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. I'm filling in as the chair of this session for Martin Klein, who unfortunately was unable to participate at the last minute. The facilitation of research use of web archives has been an animating goal for the Iipc and Iipc member institutions since its inception. And just as early was the recognition of the complexities and particularities of archive web data as research source material and the need for assessment of researcher needs. The community has experimented with various models, services, and tools, as well as conducted outreach and pilot projects with researchers in the intervening years. One of the more prominent and successful recent examples, whose exploits have been shared at previous Iipc web archiving conferences, has been the Archives Unleashed project. Today's session covers the latest developments in that project, its tighter union with increasingly programmatic researcher support efforts at Internet Archive and Archiveit, and the case study participation of collaborating researchers who have helped to inform the latest iteration of the platform, the Archives Research Compute Hub, or ARCH. With that, please allow me to introduce the panelists. So I think, is Jefferson ultimately able to join us? Yes, Jefferson Bailey from the Internet Archive, Ian Milligan from the University of Waterloo, Nick Ruest from York University, Valérie Schafer from C2DH, Frédéric Clavert from C2DH and the University of Luxembourg. We will hear now briefly from speakers for each of the 3 presentations in this session before moving on to a couple of questions from me and then questions from the audience, all of you. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom and submit any questions, as well as to upvote any of the submitted questions as well. And with that, I would ask the speakers to please turn their cameras on and unmute as they speak. I think we're going to hear from Jefferson first.
Great, thank you, Nicholas. Of course, thank you, Iipc, for having us do this session. In my presentation, which hopefully you watched the video, if not, then you can go watch it while I'm talking, but I will speak much more shortly here than I did there. I tried to talk about a little bit of the history of trying to support computational uses of web archives, both that we have conducted at Internet Archive, but also just through research of what others have tried in the community. There have been other successful projects, mostly still at the National Library or large research library level, but I think there's a lot of potential for distributing sort of computational research services on web collections or even just digital collections more broadly to more types of institutions. And that is sort of one of the underlying missions of the project that we talk about in our session. Otherwise, my presentation mostly tried to cover various methodological, conceptual, and technical challenges that web archives present to supporting data-driven work from the scholarly analytical perspective, as well as from custodial institutions like ourselves and many on the call that are trying to enable different types of access to the amazing web archives that we've built. So that's my spiel. That's what my section of the talk about, which is sort of, we called it design, which was sort of just looking at the background of what various efforts have tried in the past, what challenges emerged from those, both for researchers, but also from the librarians and archivists supporting them, and the engineers that have to design systems or data set schemas or whatever the case might be to support those activities, and tried to give a little perspective on program development for memory institutions when they're thinking about how can I make these our web archives successful beyond just replay and Wayback Machine style access. What do I need to think about in terms of staffing or infrastructure or technologies internally that might be necessary, and how should I, how should I prepare for things I'm not prepared for as far as what researchers will request, what they will attempt to understand about our collections that we may or may not be able to answer quite easily. So that's the gist of my section of the talk, and that was intended to give a little background and sort of lay the landscape for how we went about in our more specific project of integrating Archive.it and Archives Unleashed. So that's my spiel. I don't know how long I was supposed to take, but that's how long I took.
Seems just fine, Jefferson. Thanks for that summary of your talk on the sort of design component of the overall project. I'm wondering if Ian and or Nick want to go next on the build piece.
Sure. So Nick and I are both here for the Q&A, and I'll give a quick rundown of our video, which I'm sure you all watched and loved and nominated for a multitude of awards. So our paper was on, picking up from where Jefferson was on the project that Archives Unleashed has partnered with the Internet Archive's Archive.it service to build something that we call the Archives Research Compute Hub, or ARCH. I sort of highlighted at the start of the video the team effort that went into it, both myself, Jefferson, Nick, who's here as well as Helga Holzman, Cody Willis from the Internet Archive, and Samantha Fritz from the University of Waterloo. What we were trying to do is rise to what we've identified as the sort of Archives Unleashed challenge, which is that we want people to be able to run analysis on web archives, but we really feel that the available analytics tools, community infrastructure, and inaccessible web archival interfaces present high barriers for conducting research with web archives at scale. So starting in 2017, we had our Archives Unleashed project. We launched something called the Archives Unleashed Cloud, which was mostly developed by Nick, who will join us at the Q&A. That was really awesome, but it ran on Compute Canada infrastructure. We spent all this time sipping data around the networks, and crucially, it really depended on funding. We needed Compute Canada funding to keep that cloud going. We needed Mellon funding to keep Nick going, to pop up with help with the ongoing development of it. So in 2020, we started the second phase of the project, which is two parts. One is to merge Archives Unleashed with Archive.it. So there's this end-to-end solution. You're in the same interface to collect the web archives all the way through to the study of web archives, and that's ARCH. And then we also have a separate program, the cohort program, which is where we're fostering and supporting a research community of practice by offering opportunities to engage with web archive research, such as Valérie and Frédéric's paper, which you'll talk about. The meat of the video is really a live demo of ARCH. I can't really do that. I could try to mime it with my hands. Feel free to check out the video if you haven't already, but basically kind of looks like you're in Archive.it, but you go into Archive.it, nice familiar environment, but crucially you can say, I want to take my web archive collection, and there's over a dozen different kind of scholarly data sets you could build. I want all the text, I want all the networks, I want to know what kind of binary files you've got in there. You go through, you click run job, you wait, it goes in a queue, boom, your job is there. You could download the text files. You can do some cool in-browser visualizations of like network diagrams or text files and stuff like that, and it all kind of works seamlessly. That's probably the meat of the presentation. At the end of the video, we also concluded some lessons learned, and those are really, if you build it, they won't come. So that's why we're working to actively create an environment where users feel comfortable, both through UX testing, working with our cohorts, working with our community more broadly. Lesson 2, work to meet your users. We're not going to make all our users happy, but we need to listen and be responsive. And then lesson 3, be ready for the unexpected. If you say, hey, it's a 1 in a million thing, if you've got like hundreds of petabytes of data, you're going to run into it dozens of times in your work. So be ready for error handling and continual improvement. And yeah, I think that's a rundown of the video. And then I'll maybe hand it over to Valérie and Frédéric to speak about the last part of our experience.
Yeah, I'm happy, Valérie and Frédéric, if you want to pick it up from there. I will put in a note, Ian, that if we have time, it would be great if you could try to mime a demo of ARCH.
With some music, it'll be fun.
Sorry, yes, thank you very much, Nicolas. Thank you to Iipc for welcoming us. And yeah, as you may have in mind, the title of the session is Design, Build, and Use. And as Jan just explained, yes, we are the users of Arch and of all the tools developed by the Archive Unleashed team. So our title was When Personas Become Real Users. Why this title? Because we start our presentation with a reference to a WorkNet paper that Jan published, which is entitled, "You should not need to be a web historian to use web archives, lowering barriers to access through community and infrastructure." And so during our video with Frédéric, we discussed this question of lowering barriers, communities, infrastructures, and so on. Also giving a feedback of our very concrete experience of being a cohort within the program launched by the Archive Unleashed team. And our project is related to the study of the huge data set of the COVID-19 collections that Iipc gathered. So to make it very short, we reflect on these personas that Jan Milligan distinguished in his paper, and it was a computational humanist, a digital humanist, and a conventional historian. So we discuss these boundaries and heterogeneity as an asset for a team which is studying web archives, as in our case. Then we discuss the question of technical, but also cognitive access, the need for communities, for interdisciplinarity, for mentorship as provided by the Archive Unleashed team, and the question of infrastructure, Arch and beyond. We explain how we are currently using, for example, Jupyter notebooks to go further into the exploration of the Iipc COVID-19 collection. And we give a very concrete feedback related to our experience with Arch, the iterative process, the use of samples, and the whole data set or organization, thanks to Dataton, the lowered but sometimes also elevated barriers. And in the case of the Iipc data set, we have to deal with a big but also a multilingual data set, which is of course a huge challenge. So I make it short, but yeah, we can develop it during the question, but our experience is very positive, but also very challenging, I would say.
That's great. So I want to thank all the presenters for their short summaries of their presentations, and start to move into the Q&A. So I see the audience is already starting to submit and upvote questions there. So please do that as we proceed. I'm going to lead off with a few questions. So I think one of the through lines through all of your presentations, you were talking about the criticality of web archives as a research source for specific types of research, historical research for the 21st century and so on. So I'm wondering how you feel the Archives Unleashed 1 project, as well as the current effort, how much progress do you feel like you've made in terms of making inroads to the communities of researchers that could and should use web archives for the kinds of research they're doing? And maybe that's a question for Ian, Nick, or Jefferson in particular.
I can lead us off, and then I don't know. I mean, I would say I think it's a work in progress. I think that one of the things we're hamstrung by is because we work primarily on archive collections. There's just that natural bottleneck of archive collectors have rights to their data, right? And so, for people to be able to use our tools, both when it was the cloud as well as when it's Arch, they need to have that connection with an archive account holder. And I think we'd like to make that more seamless, and there's energy to do that. But and I think we're still at an early stage, so we haven't done that full general release. So I'll be really curious, and I'm curious what Nick and Jefferson think. Once we go to a general release, how we'll make sure to catch the audiences that we want to catch. I don't think we can hear you, Nick. Is that?
Nick, I think you're muted.
You unmuted, but you didn't make noise. I can continue while Nick gets set up. It is the intent for Arch to be generalizable to any digital collection. We are starting obviously with web archives, and we are even at a more granular level starting with archivic collections, but we have already created derivatives from generic artificial collections, I guess you would call them, culled from the Wayback Machine. So this is not like a partner collection with a thematic focus or anything. It might just be a subset of CNN or something like that. So we have started to explore there. I think to speak more to Nicholas's question at a higher level, it's very hard to do the recruitment of disciplinary communities without having something that is relatively off the shelf to help with their request. And I talked about that a bit in my presentation, which is if you go out and do the recruitment and get all these amazing use cases, how are you going to support them? Because they're all going to be very bespoke, specific request for a very specific portion of data with a very specific extraction job. And it could be a very large amount of data that takes a very long time to run, and you need the infrastructure, and you need the data engineer, and you need the, data sharing agreement. And there's just a lot of pieces to it that I think if we did a lot of outreach before we had something sort of generalizable, which is what we were trying to build with Arch, then it really becomes a very heavy burden for whoever is doing the research services support. The calls, the emails, the data jobs, the put the data on drives and put it in a box and ship it to somebody. There's just many, many pieces that require a fair amount of both human and technical capacity. So I think, at least on our part, there's been a little reluctance to do really heavy outreach recruitment to disciplinary communities until we were at a more established place to be able to serve them well and not frustrate them with, we can't run that job now, or it's going to take 6 months for us to get to you or whatnot. So I think Arch is in a great first step to getting a foundational layer to be able to run a very wide range of analytical jobs on web collections that can suit many different types of disciplinary and scholarly analysis. And now that we have it, or it's almost released, we can actually start to ramp up some of the research. And I think Nick and Ian can talk about the cohort program, which is like starting to do that outreach with some technical support and such in a very sort of smaller, research team environment.
Do I work now?
You work.
Hey, cool. I was going to say, the one thing this time around, in the first round of the Mellon grant process, we had the datathons, and we basically got folks like kind of a day and a half crash course on using this stuff, and it was like these kind of like fits and starts of research projects, whereas the cohort program allows folks to basically spend almost like a calendar year with us and other teams doing this type of research and engage with the tools and have, if you want to call it mentoring from like Ian and I and other folks, I think it's a lot we're all learning at the same time, but also really trying to support each other. And it's really been great for learning how to, or like helping to adapt the tools that we've created to the researchers instead of like building this thing and being like, okay, you guys figure out how to use it. So that kind of like feedback back and forth has been really great, but also just to help and watch these research projects go from like just basically an idea pitch until like the whole publication cycle has been really good. And we're just getting to that kind of end process now. And I think it's been way better than just like the little datathons and seeing what folks come up with.
Yeah, so it definitely seems like one of the virtues and the goals of the project was to have this sustained and programmatic engagement with researchers to really inform the design of a much more generalizable platform, generalizable set of services and data structures. And maybe that's a place to sort of pivot to a question to Valérie and Frédéric about with the kind of the general services that were being designed and the sort of specific research inquiry that you were undertaking, how was it kind of bridging the gap or navigating the gap? What was your experience? What did you find was missing? How did that go?
I can answer first if you wish, Valérie.
Sure,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, okay, let's go. To be honest, it was my first time I was really working on web archive, so I cannot compare to anything else, to a previous experience. Having the possibility to work on CSV files instead of work files, that's a first thing that really facilitates our researchers' life, because CSV is quite well known and well used by researchers, and work files, unless you are specialized in web archiving, are not really known. It's a bit more complicated because of that, because we don't have the experience of work files. So CSV files are really easy to handle when they are well formed, and in this case they are. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we didn't have getting the CSV files. It's not only a question of format, it's also the fact that lots of things were already extracted from the work files, the links, all the graph files, the network files, for instance. You would just have to download it, and it's almost ready for Gephi or for your Jupyter notebooks, or you can directly work on the information. You are not obliged to extract it from the work files. So that's really making our life easier too. What remains a problem, it's a question of volume. In this case, we've got an initial corpus of 5.5 terabytes, which is around 8.7 lines in a CSV, 8.7 million scrolls, sorry, which is huge. So I don't know the numbers by heart. I just logged into the interface to have those numbers. So 8.7 million scrolls, it's a lot. So basically 8.7 HTML files. It's really a lot, and that's the main problem we had, and that's where, for now, the Archive-Unleashed toolkit does not bridge the gap. It's really a question of volume. But just to give you an idea, so the initial corpus is 5.5 terabytes, and when you just want the CSV files with the texts extracted from the web pages, it goes down to 45 gigabytes. 45 gigabytes, you can do something on your computer with it. You can go and see one of your colleagues from the computing department to see if you can work with him or her, if he or she can show you how to use your Iipc facility. If you come with a 5.5 terabyte work file, or set of work files, that's going to be hard, because your colleagues from the computer department do not know what a work file is, and it's really huge. Even them, they have a difficulty to handle files that are that large. So that's the two things: the fact that the corpus is already, the information is already extracted into CSV files for you. That's really easing our life. But for this corpus, the volume and all the difficulties of what we can call big data are still there.
So it sounds like it goes, oh, sorry, Valérie, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may just add something, yeah, the interface is very intuitive, and the fact that there are samples is also very helpful, and especially when you have such a big data set. So to have a look and to immediately have, a kind of a mindset of your data set, I would say. So the fact that it's intuitive is a very good point. For sure, it doesn't prevent you for having to be a bit aware of web archives, because if you find something, a sample with tight mime, or you have to know what it is and what is in your corpus, and what kind of sample you get. We had a surprise also because our corpus was growing through time. So we had also, the corpus was increasing, and it was a bit surprising. Another thing I want to underline, something we were missing, because you asked us, Nicolas, it's at the very beginning, but that's why it's very important, and also very, very great to have also always this kind of loop meetings with the Archive Unleashed team to also give them some feedback at the very beginning to run jobs and to enter the interface. You could be just one user. And we are a cohort of 6 people with Niels Brugger, Susan Assmann, and others. And you may imagine we are so excited. Everybody wanted to connect at the same time and to have a look at the interface and at the data set. So we had to organize ourselves. But after you have run a job, then the other can access easily to the interface. And this is something which is, I'm not sure it's already solved, but they are working on it. But just to tell you that at the starting point, we were so happy to have access to all this, this data, these samples, and this, that was very, very exciting.
That's great. It sounds very promising. It sounds like it very much sort of lowered the barrier to entry to new kinds of research. I think there's maybe some questions there that we could circle back on about kind of what it means for a research team to be working in this environment rather than individual researchers. But I'm noticing that like Q&A questions are coming fast and furious. So I'm wondering if we can switch over to some of those. So at the moment, the top ranked question here is from Helena Byrne, and she's wanting to know from the panel, have you assessed what skills users need to have as a baseline for using these tools?
You want me to go first?
Sure, Nick, go for it.
Okay. I guess one thing to, highlight something Frédéric said was, like all you need access to like the platform, but you click and you create these jobs, and every single one of the jobs, except for 2 of them, or no, 3 of them, produce CSV files. So it was very much our intention to say, take the works out of the equation for the researchers, unless they really, really want them and they want to use the tools with them. Like that's another, I guess, set of problems. But if our goal is to just allow researchers or archivists or web archivists or collectors to just see what's in these things, CSVs are, I think, a good baseline entry point. There's a world of data science tools out there to use them. If you had to hit that initial hurdle of making sure you create the CSVs correctly and escape like all the weird stuff that can come out in a web archive. But from there, you just say, here's a simple CSV with 2 columns in it, like the domain and how many times it occurs. There's one you can do a fair bit of research in. And then from there, it's kind of scaled out to like different MIME types of like, here's information about all the PDFs. Here's information about all the images, audio, video, and then like web graphs. And then some folks want like the content, the text, so you can do textual analysis with. So just give that big chunk of information available to researchers, and then hopefully like take a lot of the like onboarding or like working with web archives out of the equation and just open it up to the whole, I guess, data science world that's out there, and take a lot of that pressure off of like saying like, this is the work specification, this is how you get this little thing out of it, and this thing, that little thing out of it. I don't know if that answers it.
That's great, Nick. Does anyone else have strong feelings on this or anything they want to add to this question?
I think Nick answered it perfectly from my point of view.
Great. I want to pick up on another question here from the Q&A. What feedback have you received from researchers, research communities so far on these tools? Has this changed how the service is provided? So maybe I would start with Valérie and Frédéric and ask them, what has been your feedback on the tool? You know, what do you feel like is missing? Where would you like to see it evolve?
I can just say that yes, we give feedback regularly because we have 2 meetings per month with the team. So, for example, at some point, I guess they slightly changed the button you had to click on, because from the beginning, I was not clicking on the right button to get the CSV files, for example. So you need a very user-friendly interface, and it is the case. Second, it's very interesting to have a kind of discussion with experts who are not just there to provide a service, but also they are researchers. They know very well how to handle web archives, how to work with them from also a research scientist point of view. So discussions are not just based on having a user-friendly interface, but they are very aware of or needs that may be, for example, a kind of scalable reading, not just distant reading or big data and domain names analysis, but very mixtures of methodologies. And this is interesting to discuss this with the team. And for example, Sam spent almost 1 hour with all the volunteers within cohorts to get better and detailed feedback on our experience, but also taking into account our experience with web archives. And this comes back to the question by Elena about skills users need to have. We have in our team a real heterogeneity. We have a computer scientist. We are all interested in web archives, but for example, Frédéric was more accustomed to digital heritage that he collected, like tweets and so on, and not web archives. So, and we are all learning from the fact that we are a team and that we have also this mentorship, which is very, very useful for us.
And there is also the day-to-day support that we can have. For instance, there is this story about the timestamp. At the beginning, in fact, each line had as a timestamp only the dates, not hours, minutes, seconds, etc. And that was a problem because one web page can be crawled several times a day. So I just asked if getting the full timestamp was possible, and I think, Nick, you told me that you already knew someone who would ask that, and it was almost ready. So in a matter of what, 1 day you had the timestamp, we run all the jobs, and that was okay. So there is also this Slack platform that of the Archive-Unleashed toolkit that's allowed a really day-to-day support, and sometimes this day-to-day support led to modification of the files and of the functionalities.
Yeah, thank you, Valérie and Frédéric. The only thing I guess I would expand on that is Valérie mentioned it, is we did this round of the grant. We really took UX and UI testing a lot more serious than we did the first time around. The first time around is like whatever I could make worked. This time around we had 3 rounds of UI and UX testing that was headed by Samantha Fritz, our project manager, and she worked with a couple folks from Internet Archive, Peggy Lee the first time around, and Cody Wills the second and third time, I want to say. And they did like 3 exhaustive rounds of surveys with our research partners, but also we identified like stakeholders of heavy Archive-It users and other researchers, and their feedback was like phenomenal. It really helped us kind of tease out a lot of stuff and like where like we might have made some design choices before, and we were just like, let's see what happens. We got good feedback to either reinforce a path we went down, or just say that was like a really dumb path and we should fix that. And I'm really happy. I think everybody else are really happy with how far it's come along in just like a course of, I think, a calendar year or so. And there's still work to be done. There's, I think it was like kind of one of the QA questions of what next is to be done. And it's really just trying to figure out how we can filter. Because right now, like if you run a job, it runs on the entire corpus, and then we leave it to the end user to then further filter on what they want to, because you have the CSV files and you can filter down. But one of the ideas is to pre-filter, say I only want like certain dates or domains and stuff like that. So to figure out how to like work that in from like a UI perspective, and also like a technical, I guess, back-end perspective is like one of the next real big hurdles that we have to work out. Does that get everything?
I think that pretty well covers it, unless Ian or Jefferson feel like there's any point that hasn't been well represented yet.
No, I mean, I think Nick put it really well, and it dovetailed with the challenges of, hey, you get a 45 gig text file, still a little big, right? So filtering, as Nick's talked about, would really help us make that more meaningful for folks.
So it feels like one of the,
sorry, one of the other things I was going to add is like we have a Slack channel. I don't know what you call it, like a Slack instance. We have a channel devoted to each of the cohorts too, and they were able to provide like feedback, like ad hoc of like, hey, this thing's broken, this thing's broken. We were able to like jump in and fix that as well. Sorry, that's it.
So I was just going to say, it seems like one of the things we're talking about here is like where various processing or manipulation of the data takes place, right? So the derivative data could be handed off to the researchers, and they may, perform various post-processing operations with their local tools. Nick, you're talking about moving some of the filtering operations upstream into Arch itself and creating more affordances for that. There's also a question here in the Q&A from Christy Moffett, which talks about kind of like at the level, next level higher than that, sort of upstream, what are the characteristics of web archive collections that make them more research friendly? What can curators do to make collections more usable with Arch? And this kind of goes to, like in Jefferson's presentation, Jefferson, you were talking about how you repeated multiple times that like more data doesn't necessarily make for better research. So I feel like some of Christy's question is, if not more, then what? Like what's the qualifier? What's the kind of curatorial interventions, the way in which these collections are constructed that makes for the best collection of archive web data to come into Arch, to then go through these post-processing operations and be useful in a generalizable way for researchers. Jefferson, maybe you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. One thing that's been very intriguing in working with researchers over the years is that they do tend to, so far they have very much tended to go to the extremes of collection requesting, which is either they're very interested in topical, subject-based, very bounded, well-described, curated collections, like traditional research library special collection in web archive form. And the other extreme is that they just want all of everything from these 1,000 websites for 25 years. And it's been, researchers tend to come in sort of with a preordained thought of what is going to be the most useful question or the most useful collection to answer their question. And once you start talking to them and trying to go through like, what kind of data sets are you interested in, or what are you looking to extract and things, it actually, like, their preconceptions are often, it's not that they're not wrong, they're just only informed by what they have brought to it. And most of these researchers don't know anything about web archives. They don't understand how they're collected. They don't understand that, like, if they're requesting it from us Internet Archive, I can pull from 10,000 different crawl jobs, all of which have different scoping parameters and blah, blah, blah. They don't really need to know all the details of all that sort of provenential information necessarily. In some cases they might, but for the most cases they don't. They just like want the data. They might just want 1 billion text files. And that's, you know, they don't care what website or host they come from. They just want text to do language, something, something, something. So I think as far as like research services support, which is like, you know, folks on this call will be the front line of trying to walk people through those scenarios. And so, you know, the characteristics of the collections that you have custodianship of or that are making available, knowing not just, of course, the, you know, the origin of those and all the metadata. And most folks in Archive.it are doing very excellent metadata, descriptive metadata work. There's a little bit of the technical metadata, which I think most people know, which is why did the crawl do this? Why is it missing this? Why did it only run from here to here? Like then the host name changed and it's in a different collection. So there's a little collection management trivia, I guess, that would be a good characteristic for a curator to know. But I think the most important one is not just thinking that the collections they're interested in are the only collections that can benefit their research. And that's like really the expertise of the librarian or the archivist that can help make those connections and help them know what's possible from all of your collections and not just like ones on COVID or something like that. So.
Ian, I see you nodding along strongly here. Do you want to add anything?
No, I see Valerie putting her hand up.
Yeah, I did because I want to come back to the question by Christy. Are there characteristics of Web Archive collections that make them more research friendly? I would say that we are facing a turn into the studies of Web Archives, and we are more and more working as teams. And what makes also this study research friendly is the fact that we can access data outside, not at home, but in a space for the whole team. In this case, outside the wall of libraries, but where we can also test our own tools or tools that are open tools, where we can discuss, share the corpus and so on. I know there are legal issues related to Web Archive collections in many countries, but the fact that, for example, in the WorkNet project, a lot of libraries provided us with seed list, with metadata and so on. The fact that in this case, we have access to the collection, and I really thank Iipc, but also Archive.it and the Archive Unleashed team for providing us with this access. Of course, we have also to secure the data. There are legal issues, but the fact that we can access directly this data and share them within our team is very important. It may be another kind of dispositif. For example, the BNF Data Lab that opened up this year allows for a team to work in a shared space and to discuss also with web archivists and so on. But we really need this shared space to work on the data, to access them. This makes really Web Archive collection research friendly.
If I could quickly, I mean, it's funny, and I see that from Anders in the chat as well around the administrative agreement dimensions of that. So I think, you know, hopefully maybe not sharing works makes it a little bit easier for people to feel that they can circumvent the sort of copyright worries and legal risk worries, et cetera. And, you know, I think it occurs to me that maybe even templated agreements would be handy if we had those somewhere on a website to download, to be like, hey, here's an agreement that has worked for, you know, Archive.it partners in the past. Just to, because that's the big barrier, and that's a lot of our legwork we do with cohorts is, you know, hooking them up and making that matchmaking connection, thanks to our friends at the Internet Archive with collectors. And to my knowledge, I don't know if Jefferson, like, to my knowledge, almost everybody's like, yeah, this is great. I want people to use my collections. And if you don't share the works, that assuages my my legal concerns.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think, kind of complements something Jefferson was saying, is it came up with a lot of our cohort teams, because a lot of the teams just pick collections based on the research topic. So what Jefferson was talking about, like, hey, I want like research topic A, I'm going to go through the whole archive catalog and identify everything that has name and title like this. And then they start working with the data and they realize that like, hey, this isn't quite what research topic A was. It was almost, and then it's like you have to hook them up with the folks that collected it, so the curators and stuff like that. So you have to build it up and tease out how these collections were made and they're curated and like the choices that they were made. And then you tease out and you find a lot of things like, hey, maybe it was precarious labor that created these collections, or maybe it was just like a project and it's not exactly what research topic A was. It's almost kind of like a teaser for it. And you go down this rabbit hole and you find out like, there's nothing really here. It's just a bunch of weird stuff that was collected. So it's like teasing out like those relationships are hooking people up. I think Ian might have wrote an article about that. Like it was if these archives could talk. And then the other was just as people come into the teams is like learning out how the crawls walk. Or how the crawls work. So we had a long discussion with the team last week just about like the nuances of crawling and why timestamps are the way they are, and like how, like what the scope is, how things jump out and everything like that.
So I'm looking at the clock. We have about 5 minutes left. I want to ask a follow-up question to this thread, going to some of Jefferson's comments and some of other folks' contributions on this point about what do you think what are some of the generalizable insights about the challenges and opportunities for the web archiving community to like do that researcher support? What do you feel like you've learned from this project that you might commend to the rest of the community as an area of investment, as an area of focus for the rest of us in helping to bridge the gap on the researcher support piece? To anyone who feels like they have a comment on that.
Sure, I'll comment on it, but then I'll keep it short and hand it off to others to comment as well for our
Great.
Closing comments. I think we are all here building collections for people to use, and access is the most important thing, and it's also the hardest thing in web archives. Everybody knows about URL Wayback Machine style replay, but that has useful documentary sort of research use, but it really doesn't do the sort of data-driven computational research that is increasingly prevalent in not just academia, but even in journalism and in other fields as well. People are interested in looking at things over time and large volumes of material and winnowing it down and making insights and discovery through these sort of interpretive, iterative activities. And so I think web archives are big, so they can answer almost any questions. They're longitudinal, which is very different than traditional library collections, which are a thing published on a date, summarizing whatever. So they just have so many affordances that can support so many different types of questions, but providing access to them in the ways that people are increasingly expecting is really, it is challenging. And so, but it's really expensive to build and maintain these collections, and web archives dwarf most other collections in infrastructure requirements, like the cost of data storage, all these things. And those arguments are going to be increasingly hard to justify unless you are making them as available and accessible as possible. So I think there's almost like an existential motivation to pursuing how the community can make web archives more and more useful. And of course, you have to collect it, immediately because of the high disappearance and ephemerality and things like that. But so it's sometimes hard to justify the volume of use right now. But the web is basically the only documentary source of, at this point, many decades, and will be for many decades more. So it will, even if it's not heavily used right now, it will absolutely be heavily used going forward. So.
And maybe I'll pick up from Jefferson. I mean, I think for us, one thing that underscores everything we do is a recognition that, like, hey, none of this is easy, and it's never likely to be easy. Because every time we thought we've come up with some sort of magic bullet, you realize it's not, right? Like, it requires, we have issues around file system trouble, you're dealing with gigs of data, all of this requires sort of a level beyond. And so, I think a lot of what's underpinned our datathons that we ran during our first grant and the cohorts now is, trying to build up skills in community. We do user experience testing. We work with our community to lower barriers on our end, but we also need to work with our community to get them into a spot where they can work with us. And it's sort of a double-edged relationship. And so, I think for us, it's, building skills, building community, things like Iipc help build that. The datathons for a while help do that. The cohorts, are doing that more intensively. The question will be, what's the end state? Is there a sustainable way we can build community that doesn't require, bi-weekly phone calls and physical events and things like that? But trying to keep that energy going so that, as we develop tools, we're always connected to our users, but crucially, users have opportunities for development to get into a place where they can work with data at scale.
Valérie, Frédéric, do you want to add anything as a final note on this question?
If I may not on this question, but I just have an answer to Eve, who was asking us if, for example, the archive Unleashed toolkit or Arch was serving better or research than Solar Wayback. Or I find it's an excellent question, and I just answered that we don't want to select, because we also like the Solar Wayback and we want to keep it too, and to have both. They are very complementary, and we are at a momentum or a time where there are so many tools that are developing thanks to a lot of initiatives, and for us as researchers it is very useful. So I really think that we are very happy to experience also the Solar Wayback and other tools. But one thing which is very important with the Archive Unleashed team is that, as Jan Milligan underlined, it's a team, it's a community which is building upon shared interest like Iipc, like the RISO network and so on, and we need this for Web Archive. So to stay as a community and to have collective work is really very important, and to have this dialogue between web archivists and researchers.
Thank you, Valérie. Thank you for picking up that that upvoted question in the Q&A. So everybody, we're at time. I want to thank you, all of our panelists. I want to thank Olga, Kelsey, Robin, and Tracy for their preparation and logistical support, and to all of the audience for your participation. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but please feel free to pick it up in the Slack channel.